นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings. When we meditate, practice mindfulness, begin turning our attention back on our own body and mind, it becomes quite obvious how the mind always seems to be moving. Always another thought, another emotion coming up, another reaction. We're always using our senses, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. And when you practice something such as mindfulness of breathing, bringing your attention to one place, or we say one object of mind, developing one-pointedness or single-pointedness of mind, where this movement is exposed. Because of course every few seconds another thought, another sensation arises, and it's so easy to become caught up in it, distracted. But the idea is you keep meditating, keep cultivating this quality of mindfulness, clear comprehension. It starts to change your way of looking at your own mind. And from that changes your experience of the world, the whole world. Your world changes. One thing you notice with this movement, endless movement, thinking, the next thought, the next plan, the next fantasy arising, we spend a lot of time living in the future. Not so aware, not so present in the moment, not so mindful in the moment, and thoughts racing on about what we're going to do next. Tomorrow, next week, next year. And much of that is stimulated by craving, attachment, discontent. So often we have this feeling, I'm discontent with my life right now, what I'm experiencing. So then there's the searching and the hoping and expecting of something better in the future. And this is going on all the time, whether we realize it or not. And the Buddha said we tend to swing between our imagination and planning for the future and then dwelling on the past, just reliving the past. And even when we think about the past, it's not that we're always remembering things exactly as they happen. We straight away, as soon as you think about past events, you start to put your own interpretation on them. And that's another source of endless mental activity, regret, disappointment, missing, longing for things that we like, feeling sad about things, but often embellishing and changing our own memories over time. And so rarely are we in the present moment, which is why it's so valuable to practice mindfulness. With mindfulness you develop also some equanimity, steadiness of mind, equanimity, which is such a valuable quality. Another word for equanimity is impartiality or unbiased. quality of mind, where rather than leaping to the future, trying to imagine and hope for and expect new things that may solve your problems or bring you greater success and happiness, you have this quality of equanimity or impartiality in the present moment. And that's actually a great source of contentment. And that's different from indifference, where you don't care or you're sort of numb. But it's accepting however you feel, whatever's going on in the present moment, rather than racing on to the future or dwelling in the past. So the stronger the mindfulness, the more we practice it, the more the quality of equanimity, impartiality comes up. And it has a certain purification effect on the mind. As the Buddha said, when you practice samadhi to the point of jhana, this quality of equanimity purifies the mind, purifies your view, purifies your experience. Because of the impartiality, you're able to see things as they are, rather than how you would like them to be, or what you want from the world, what you expect, or what you don't like, and what you want to get rid of. Just knowing and seeing the way things are, with equanimity, with mindfulness. So another aspect of equanimity is it brings a sense of stillness, steadiness, stillness to the mind. Even if you're in the midst of a busy world, the stillness can still be there. And you notice when you're always dwelling in the future, you're imagining, planning, scheming, fantasizing. The mind is not still, and that movement is quite tiring. You're endlessly trying to work out the future, plan it, sort out all your problems ahead of time, get everything into place. It's quite hard mentally. It uses up a lot of energy, and of course you're easily disappointed when things don't go to plan, which it never does, because you can't imagine everything as it's going to be. Who could know what's going to happen next? Even just a few moments from now, we can't be exactly sure how we'll feel, what's going to be going on around us, what I'm going to say, what the weather's going to do, what other people around you in your home, wherever you are now, what they're going to do. We can't predict with accuracy exactly what's going to happen even a few minutes on from now, let alone tomorrow, next year, and the rest of our life. So it's almost like we're setting ourselves up for more suffering and disappointment when we get our plans wrong, or our imagination runs away with us and we see things that are not going to happen but believe they are going to happen. There's always, there was a business woman I knew many years ago whose business never quite got there, never came quite together, and it was always, things are just coming together, I just need this little break and just a few more things I have to do, and then it's all going to fall into place. And it became, whenever I met her, that became her default answer. So over several years it was always, it's just about to happen. The big break, the money's just about to come in. And of course it never did. Gamblers are often like that. Any walk of life really, you'll find that comes out, that sort of expectation, things are going to come together, and it's all based first of all on that mental proliferation, the imagination, the expectation. And partly that's driven by discontent in the present moment. The more discontent you are with how your life is, how you are right now, then the more you'll be seeking some kind of change in the future. And Buddhists are not immune from this, meditators are not immune from this. We're often hoping for the next big breakthrough in our meditation, the next blissful experience, the next insight. Buddhist monks and nuns are not immune from this. There's a well-known story of Ajahn Chah when he was a young monk. He was always planning where he's going to go next in his travels. Once he left his original monastery, he went traveling in the forests of Thailand. He was mainly looking for a teacher. But in those days, it's not like nowadays where you have all the news. You have the internet and telephone and news about where people are, what's going on. They had very little news in those days. So even if you were seeking a teacher that you'd heard of, you didn't quite know where they were. They could be hundreds of kilometers away and you don't quite know where they are and whether they're moving around or what. And in those days, when Ajahn Chah was a young monk, Thailand was full of jungle, forest, communication, travel was much harder. So anyway, he was always preparing for his next kind of move. What's going to be your next move? And he was planning to go to different places, spend time. And there was one occasion when he was staying with one of those teachers that he did find, this teacher called Lumpur Ginari. A very peaceful, quiet monk. And Ajahn Chah was sewing a new set of robes. Lumpur Ginari had arranged for some cloth for Ajahn Chah because he never asked for cloth and his robes were all worn out, and so Lumpur Ginari found him some cloth out of kindness and gave it to him to sew new robes. And Ajahn Chah went straight into this sewing. It takes quite a lot of time and effort. You have to mark out the robes, get the pattern, plan it, and then start sewing. And it's quite a complex process to sew a set of 3 robes. So he was going at it many hours a day and even into the night, sewing in a kind of obsessive way. And Lumpur Ginari, who was a very quiet, still monk, very still, and considered to be a fully awakened arahant, so his mind was completely still. Noticed that Ajahn Chah was caught in the opposite. He was constantly active, sewing his robes. So one day he just kind of quietly went up to him and said, "Oh, you're really putting a lot of time and effort into this sewing. What's the rush?" And Ajahn Chah said, "Well, I've got to finish my robes because I'm going off wandering again into the forests." Ajahn Lumpur Ginari said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, I want to go and find a good place to meditate so I can really get into my meditation. And when I get to that place, I've heard about a forest over there. It's a few days or a few weeks walk away. When I get there, then I'm really going to get into my meditation. So I have to finish my robes now so that I can get walking off to that place." And Lumpur Ginari said, "Oh, okay. So once you reach that forest and you really get into your meditation, then what are you going to do?" And Ajahn Chah said, "Oh, well, I heard there's also another place, this mountain, and there's a teacher there I want to go and visit. So I'm going to the first forest and I'm going to get into my meditation there and spend time there. And then I'm going to wander off and try and find this other teacher on this mountain, even more remote, so it's going to take me a while to get there. So I've got to get ready and get out there. And then I'm going to spend time with that teacher and meditate with him." And Lumpur Ginari said, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, good. And then once you get to that mountain with that teacher, once you've been there, well, then what are you going to do?" And he kept asking like this, and then eventually Ajahn Chah sort of got the message and he sort of went quiet and said, "Yeah, okay." Luang Por Ginari was pointing out that Ajahn Chah's mind was just racing on with the sowing, trying to get this sowing done so he could go here, and he can go there, and then he can go there. And Luang Por Ginari, who was a monk who just wanted for nothing, totally content, still, peaceful, was just exposing Ajahn Chah's imagination and planning, and how he was just living in the future, doing one thing to get somewhere else, and was missing the present moment. He was missing all this passion and craving that was coming up, putting into his sowing, but in order to get something else. We're always doing one thing to get something else, and not particularly aware of doing this one thing. Our mind is in the future already, planning, scheming. And it's not that Luang Por Ginari hadn't lived a life that was quite active. He'd walked all the way from Thailand, northeast Thailand, which is in the east, all the way across Thailand, across Burma to India, to the Buddhist holy sites. He'd walked barefoot, as far as I know. Walked around India and then walked all the way back again, and taken 10 years to do it. This is back in the 1930s. And so it wasn't that he hadn't done his share of wandering through the forest, but because he'd done that, he knew all the pitfalls, and he knew how the mind does love to plan and scheme and always have this expectation of what's coming next. And when I get there, then everything's going to be good. All my problems will be solved. He'd already experienced that, understood that very well. And he said, well, he meditated on this walking barefoot one step at a time, to the point where he didn't really think much about yesterday or tomorrow. He'd just keep his mind focused on his walking and his feet every day, and make that one day and that one particular moment in time his focus. And we believe he actually became enlightened on that trip, practicing this way, bringing his mind to the present moment. So whether you're focusing on the breath in, the breath out, or the walking, whatever it is, the idea is to train your mind to really value being in the present moment with mindfulness, with clarity. We say to tame the mind, to bring the mind under more control, because it's constantly moving away from the present moment, and that's where we experience the suffering, the restlessness, the suffering, the disappointments all come from that moving away from the present moment. And Luang Por Ginari understood this very well, and Ajahn Chah came to understand this very well. So later on in his life, when he became a teacher, he's very good at helping people to recognize their own craving and proliferation, about always wanting to go here, go there, get this new experience. They're always seeing happiness as something far away in the future that they're going to go towards or seek out and get at some point in the future, rather than being fully mindful in the present moment. Mindfulness leads on to equanimity and all the other factors of enlightenment, and they all arise in the present moment. So, we have this phrase, which is a bit of a cliche now, but it's still true. Enlightenment is here and now. Awakening is here and now. It's not in the future. It's impossible for you to get enlightened in the future. It happens in the present moment. So if your mind is always dwelling in the future, planning, imagining, scheming, then you're never going to get enlightened. Even though you may be planning about enlightenment. Imagining how it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, what you're going to be doing. Once you've sorted out all your problems, then you're going to get enlightened. In a way, we're almost helping us to become kind of disheartened and feel like it's too difficult, because if you're always thinking of that enlightenment, nibbana, is something far away in the future, it's like you're always pushing it further away from yourself, from the present moment. So it makes you feel, tired just thinking about it, and feels like it's something out of your reach. Whereas literally, nibbana is in the here and now, it's in the present moment, and the quality of mindfulness, clarity, awareness, these are qualities that bring your mind to the present moment. Developing equanimity, developing contentment with the present moment, rather than running away from it. One of the other things about fantasizing about the future is that it's a form of escape, isn't it? We call it escapism, imagining, planning, fantasizing. It's an expression of your discontent with the present moment, that you're always in the future, in your thinking. So this is one important reason why we practice mindfulness and aim to improve mindfulness, to develop this sense of being in the present, fully present in the moment, and equanimous too, to whatever we're experiencing, even if the present moment is not always pleasant or to our liking. When you meditate, you'll notice if you have pain, then you want to think about something that takes your mind off the pain. Rather than becoming mindful of the painful feeling, you want to distract yourself. And one of the biggest distractions will be planning the future, pleasures, things that are going to make you happy and that you're going to enjoy in the future. You start fantasizing about them, to get away from the unpleasant feeling that you're experiencing right here, right now. Whereas the Buddha encouraged us to be mindful of that feeling, even if it's painful. Or negative thoughts. You've become tired of reacting with aversion about something that's bothering you, so you start fantasizing, thinking, well, that will be more enjoyable. I'll start planning my holiday or what I'm going to do next to get away from these negative thoughts you're experiencing now. But this trying to get away doesn't really work, does it? Because sooner or later you come back to them. You come back to the painful feeling, you come back to the negative thoughts. Because you're not actually applying mindfulness and equanimity towards them. You're trying to run away from them, escape from them. And it's impossible because they're part of your conditioning process. So developing contentment, equanimity, impartiality towards our own experience of body and mind right now is you might say it's one of the tricks to letting go, if it is a trick. If there is a secret to letting go, then that's a big part of it, bringing up mindfulness and being content to be mindful towards and of what's arising in your body-mind experience right here, right now. Because as you bring up the mindfulness, you gain this equanimity or impartiality, then it's not such a problem. It's not something you have to escape from. It's just something you know. It feels like this. The experience of negative thoughts is like this. The experience of the painful feeling is like this. But mindfulness doesn't react with delight or aversion. It's just knowing with impartiality the way something is. And mindfulness supports insight. Insight into the impermanent nature of a painful feeling. As you become mindful of it, you may notice how it changes. It arises, it ceases, it's more intense, it's less intense, and then sometimes it disappears. but not disappearing through just escapism and fantasy, but just simply in its nature, it's changing. And if you're mindful, truly mindful of change, that in that moment you learn something, you become a little wiser to that experience, because you know, oh, this arises and ceases, that's its nature. So in every future experience of pain or negativity or a sad memory or whatever it is, that insight applies. And it gives you a little bit more detachment, there's more letting go. And we grow from that. That's how wisdom on the path, right view, right understanding develops, through mindfully experiencing things, but with this sense of impartiality, just knowing rather than reacting to and trying to get away from. Or sometimes we compound things, don't we? When you have a lot of negative thoughts, then we compound it by saying, oh, I am one with negative thoughts. I have a lot of anger or ill will. I'm not a good person. I'm a bad Buddhist. I'm a bad meditator, a bad person. And we feel sad. And we attach even more. We compound the suffering of our negative thoughts. Bringing up mindfulness is the opposite. It's liberating, because it's just knowing them as they are. They arise, they pass away. What arises and passes away is not a self. It's a part of body-mind process, the 5 khandhas. The Buddha gave us this teaching on the 5 khandhas as a way to investigate our experience, to ask questions and learn more about what we take as self and take as this person. Over and over again the Buddha would teach, observe, investigate the 5 khandhas. Are they lasting or not? Are they permanent or not? Can you take something that is impermanent as a self? Because the idea of a self is something that is lasting, solid. By asking these questions, observing with mindfulness in an impartial way, you learn, and this is the nature of the khandhas is that they arise and pass away. So all the time your mind is loosening some of its attachment. So I have this wonderful phrase that, when there's mindfulness, the mind is with the deathless, meaning that which doesn't arise and pass away. When there's true awareness and insight, then the mind is going towards the deathless. It's in the present moment and is seeing or knowing the arising and passing away of conditions. Whereas the mind that is unmindful and has no insight is as if dead already. So every day we're noticing, especially when you meditate, you'll notice how your mind is constantly dying away from the present moment, from the truth. So when you get caught into that fantasy about the future, what are you doing? Really, you're dying from the present moment. And as we know, our death lies in the future. We don't know when, how quickly it will come. But when you get lost, you're unmindfully caught into mental proliferation about the future. It's like you're going closer to your own death. Your mind has died for a few moments. One of the delusions of fantasies is they seem alive. They may stimulate us, so they bring us a bit of interest, energy. So say you're planning something in the future, well, it energizes you, doesn't it? You plan, you want this, you want that, you want to do this, do that, go here, go there. It brings some energy, and that's part of the delusion. It seems good, it seems desirable. But you have to follow it through. You keep bringing up the mindfulness and you'll realize, well, it seems desirable, but that's a delusion. And that mind is actually dying at that moment where it gets lost into the craving and the fantasy. The mind is getting weaker. Mindfulness is getting weaker, so your mind is getting weaker And eventually it's like, anything that gets weaker, it dies as it gets fully lost in the fantasy about the future. It's like it's completely gone. And eventually you wake up, don't you? You come back to reality. Oh, I'm sitting here. I'm back here in the present moment. That's when you've regained your life. So when you are floating around thinking about what you're going to do next year, you're actually like, you're dead. This is true birth and death, and the birth and death of the mind. So the Buddha encouraged us to keep practicing mindfulness, however frustrating it is, however much our mind slips away into endless proliferation. To try and bring up mindfulness is one of the most noble activities, one of the best activities a human being can do. When you notice how when you get lost into your fantasies of the future, it'll either be the positive, I want this, and it's all going to be good. When I get the thing I want, things are going to be good, and everything's going to progress, and my life will improve, and all my problems will disappear. Or when we're in a more negative, seeing things in a more negative light, well, then we're seeing the worst. So, oh no, this is going to happen in the future. The world is going to end. My life is going to end. I'm going to fail. This is going to go wrong. That's going to go wrong. I'm going to have more suffering, more pain. But the whole point is these are both equally untrue because it's mental proliferation. Either painting the rosiest, best picture you can imagine or the worst picture you can imagine. But it's the mind getting lost into its fantasies, losing its mindfulness. The reality is the mind that is right here, right now. This body right here, right now. This feeling, this thought formation right here, right now. People always, question, and they say, well, does Buddhism mean if you've got to be in the present moment, content with the present moment, so you can't have any thoughts about the future? That's not what the practice is implying. It just means when you're thinking about the future, maintain your mindfulness. And when you maintain mindfulness, that brings up wisdom that you know it's impermanent. Whatever picture you paint of the future, good or bad, it's impermanent, and it may or may not happen as you imagine. That's how the Buddha said, treat your thoughts of the future. But don't just plan as though it's all going to happen as you think. That's delusion. The Buddha was even tougher. Sometimes he'd say it's just pure foolishness. So like in one time the Buddha he liked to ask the monks, where are you going to spend your next rains retreat? Because monks tend to think about their life in that way. They say, each year we have a 3-month rains retreat where you stay in one place, and you'll say, well, where did I spend last rains? How many rains have I been ordained? Where am I going to spend next rains? We tend to think like that. But the Buddha asked the monk, he said, where are you going to spend next rains? And he said, well, I'm going to go there, in that temple or that forest, that monastery. And the Buddha said, it's not sure though, isn't it? That's a foolish answer. If you are certain you're going to go somewhere and spend 3 months, it's not actually true, is it? You haven't reached there yet. And he said, any monk who knows exactly where he'll be for the rains retreat is a fool. You have to remember that it's uncertain. You have to bring up that perception. We say the perception of uncertainty is not sure. Just as, if you're a layperson, you may have your plan of when you're going to change jobs, go for the promotion, or maybe retire, but it's not sure. Things change. Someone was here today and they're saying, well, they planned to retire at 65. Then they realize it's just not possible. They haven't got enough money yet and they need to keep going. So they might retire at 67 or 70, not sure. That's wisdom. When you see the uncertainty of your future, that's the wisdom that will free your mind from suffering. When you lock everything in, you plan it and then you lock in, it's going to be like this, I'm going to be living there, I'm going to be in that place for the rains retreat, I'm going to be in that job or that place. It's not sure. And you get caught out by the way your mind fixes it onto the future, and it becomes something that you just take for granted. You assume it will happen just like that. It's not sure. The words of a wise person are never far from impermanence. So when you make your plans or you tell someone else your plans, you say, well, if everything turns out as I planned, that's where I'll be. But you have to keep that uncertainty alive in your mind. Then you're mindful in the present moment of the uncertainty of the future. You haven't died. When you go into, it's going to be like this for sure, I'm going to be there, do this, then your mind is dead to the present moment, and you're lost in your plan of the future. And the Buddha would regularly ask monks about this kind of thing. You say, where are you going? When the monk is on alms round, where are you going? The monk said, well, if nothing happens, I'm going out to that village to collect alms and then I'll come back. And if they give the right answer, the Buddha said, that's right. You've got a chance of enlightenment if you can see impermanence. He said, if you can really see impermanence, you know that one breath in, you may not breathe out, or one breath out, you may not breathe in. But if you are having to talk about, I'm going to that village on alms, just introduce the idea, if it all works out, if everything goes according to plan, then I will collect alms there, and then I'll come back. Keep the uncertainty alive. As soon as you make things certain, you're going to suffer, aren't you? Why do we contemplate impermanence about the future? It's because we're freeing our mind from suffering. If you keep contemplating this, bringing up the mindfulness, contemplating the mind that forms all these views and plans and expectations and hopes for the future, if you keep contemplating it, you start to let go because you see the suffering. You get tired of being caught out. You're making the plan and then it doesn't happen as you want. As I said, it doesn't mean that you can't plan. Part of life is that we have to make plans, otherwise we can't do anything. But it's keeping that mindfulness of uncertainty, of impermanence as you do it, is the important thing. Then you won't get caught out, then you won't suffer when things change. They inevitably change. As Ajahn Chah got older and he had more students, he was always introducing this into monastic living, because you can do that in a monastery. Even though every day is much the same, we have similar routines, but Ajahn Chah would change things around. So he'd say, we're going to have meditation today, or we're not. No meditation now, we're going to do some building or some work project. Or today we have to sew robes or have a teaching on the suttas or the Vinaya. He would change things around just to stir people up a bit. One of the funniest ones was in the monastery there was a split in the monks. So there were those who ate vegetarian and those who ate meat, more normal diet. And they'd have a mixture of food offered to the monks, and the food would be sent down the line. So they they'd end up having two lines of monks, the lines who ate vegetarian, the lines who ate ordinary meat dishes, so that the ones giving out the food could take the food to where it needed to go. But then one day, they had two sets of food waiting to be offered, the vegetarian food and the non-vegetarian food. Ajahn Chah said, let's swap it around, see what happens. So the non-vegetarian food went down the line of vegetarian monks, and the vegetarian food went down the line of non-vegetarian monks. Sometimes it's good to face a bit of uncertainty, just to remind you where you've been complacent or you've been expecting things to go as planned, as you want. It shakes you up a bit, but it helps you to become mindful again of impermanence, of uncertainty. So the more you meditate on this, the more you do your vipassana, the more you welcome a bit of uncertainty, because you know this is just proving life is as it is. It's uncertain. Another one we used to do at Wat Marpjan when I lived there. Once in a while, all the food was, every day the food was offered to the senior monk. Usually it was Lumpur Anan or whoever was sitting at the top of the line. All the food was offered to him first, and then it goes down the line to the most junior novice at the end, and then goes back to the kitchen. Once in a while, we swapped it around, and the junior novice would receive the food first. And they received the food, all the treats that maybe they didn't always get, because the more senior monks would get them, came to the novice first. So you see their eyes light up. And say, huh? Me? I get first crack at the food? Okay. Give them a treat, and they're so nervous that the senior monks are not going to get the treats. Maybe they're too shy to take very much. And because nobody wanted to deprive the senior monks of food, all the junior monks just take a tiny bit of food, even though they get all the good stuff offered to them. So by the time it comes to the top of the line, there's still plenty of good food left. It's uncertain, isn't it? Sometimes we have to shake things up. Or another time, there was a huge thunderstorm just going on and on and on. The rain was just so intense. We tried walking out of the monastery on alms round. We got just as far as the gate of the monastery, and already everyone was completely soaked. We had umbrellas, but it was so windy and so heavy rain, the umbrellas really didn't do any good at all, and we were totally soaked. So we walked down the road, and then all the monks said, this is just too impossible. Nobody's going to come out of their house to put food in our bowls anyway. So we just walked back, and we said, we'll just sit here and meditate and see what happens, and just live with the uncertainty of the situation. When it comes down to something like food, uncertainty really hits home, doesn't it? Will I eat today or not? So we just sat there meditating, soaking wet for an hour, because it was an hour before it was time for the meal. And we weren't sure if we'd get any food. Of course, at 8 o'clock, whenever the time was, a little pickup truck comes into the monastery, and some of the villagers had felt sorry for the monks. They knew the monks couldn't walk in such torrential rain, so they quickly got together and brought some food in. It's a more simple food than we would normally eat, but at least we had something, so we didn't starve. And life is like that, isn't it? You often don't know what's coming, especially in the monk's life. You don't know what's coming next. But that's the reality, that's the reflection, it's impermanent. The mind that wants something is planning, scheming, hoping, wanting. That's the mind of suffering, because that's where disappointment comes from. The mind that is with the uncertainty, mindful of impermanence, cannot get disappointed, can it? If you can see everything is uncertain, whatever the future brings doesn't matter, because you're ready for it. Even your own death, you don't have to worry about it. When it's going to come, when will I die? Doesn't matter. It's uncertain. You focus more on uncertainty, mindfulness, uncertainty, and brings you that equanimity even towards your own future death, sickness, old age, sickness and death. Doesn't matter. That's all uncertain. The certainty is in seeing or knowing the uncertainty, and that can only be known in the present moment. If you have it as a kind of mantra, everything is uncertain, then when they say Mara can't get you, when you're one who sees the impermanence and the emptiness of things, cannot be grabbed by Mara, because they're constantly awakened to the truth. When we lose that awareness of uncertainty and lose awareness of the present moment, we're back lost in our fantasies. That's like Mara's got you, isn't it? The hordes of Mara have got you. In fact, Mara doesn't need to do very much at all. We just do it to ourselves. We keep getting lost in our own ideas, imaginations, fantasies, planning. We do it to ourselves. It's what we call kilesa Mara. It's not Mara as a person, it's just kilesa. It's just our own craving and attachment. Wanting something special, to get something special in the future. When I get my practice together, when I get my samadhi, when I get my insight, when I reach nibbana, then everything's going to be all right. But what about the present moment? How can we be all right in the future if we can't be all right in the present moment? So the way to overcome obstacles, overcome Mara, is bring up mindfulness in the present moment. Right here, right now. Whatever's happening, you have pain or no pain, your mind is peaceful or it's not peaceful, you have a good thought or a very unpleasant negative thought pops into your mind, just suddenly pops up out of nowhere. It's not sure, it's uncertain. If you're really mindful, then you just say, well, I was expecting that. I was expecting the random negative thought shooting up from the past. Unexpectedly catching me by surprise. You're not really surprised because you're mindful of uncertainty. This is how we use vipassana and insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, to our advantage. You're keeping your mind in this place of equanimity, impartiality, free from suffering. And you get tired of following craving. The official word is dispassion, disenchantment. Get disenchanted with suffering, with fantasizing, imagining, hoping, wanting. And the mind is happier to be still with the present moment, from moment to moment. Just like Lumbur Ginari, who walked all the way from Thailand to India and back again, 10 years. He walked to the point where his mind is totally settled and happy in the present moment. No more thoughts of the past, no more thoughts of the future, or no more longing for the past, no more longing for the future, rather. So he could pass that one on to Ajahn Chah and just say, just keep your mind in the present moment, everything else is uncertain. The more we can do that, the happier we'll be, because we'll be free from craving and attachment. The mind will be more at peace in the present moment rather than always running away from it into fantasy. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and afterwards there's a chance for some Q&A.